As brilliant as Max Verstappen's drive was today to win the Pirelli Italian Grand Prix at Monza, as brilliant as the performance of Red Bull as a team was today as well, Max couldn't hide that hint of anger in his eyes in the moments after getting out of the car. Why? Very simple. He hated giving that position back to Lando Norris, and I totally get that. I think Red Bull made exactly the right call, and it was a very difficult call to make after everything that happened in Spain when they made a call before the FIA stewards had weighed in. But they told Max to give that position back as he was going into the Parabolica on lap 1. Max came back on the radio and said, "Are you sure?" And they said, "Yes, give it back, Max." At which point he feathered the throttle coming down the pit straight. This is at the end of the first flying lap. Braked slightly and let Lando pass back into the lead. He hated that for one very good reason, and that is because when Lando went down the inside of Max at the start, very good start by Lando, not detracting from that at all, he ran very wide in the middle of turn 1, the right-hander. And if Max actually hadn't gone off-road, they would have touched for sure. But you can't argue that, you can't talk about that, and the sporting regulations always favour the overtaking car because they want lots of overtaking in Formula One. And I think it was more that Max knew there was nothing he could do about it, and that the team had made exactly the right call that made it burn inside him. Obviously, I'll get over that very quickly. But that was just an insight, I thought, into the way Max Verstappen is as a racing driver. It'd be very easy to come in from 30,000 feet, have a look at this Italian Grand Prix, say, what a walkover win for Max Verstappen, boring race, whatever they might want to say. But they wouldn't take that into account. Max absolutely livid about that. And what a job he did after that. It's difficult to remember the last time a leader of a race had to give a lead away to the P2 guy, and then immediately repasses virtually within 4 laps. He's back in front again and pulling away and going on to win the race. Doesn't happen very often, but absolutely superb drive by Max thereafter. You could say that was a slight blemish, I guess, that first corner, but absolutely perfect after that. And if you look at the way he drove the lap after he passed Lando going into 1 at the beginning of lap 4, he was early on the brakes, he was stable on the entry to the slow corners, he wasn't brilliantly quick through the Lesmos, but he focused very much on the exit of Ascari and then the exit of the Parabolica, made it look easy in other words. Yes, Red Bull had a top speed advantage, but yes, Max Verstappen absolutely took it out 100% to its extreme, to the point where when DRS in play, it only took Max 1 lap to be beyond Lando's reach with DRS, and that summed up the day, summed up the race. Lando making small mistakes as ever, Oscar Piastri making small mistakes as ever, Max making no mistakes whatsoever. He was caught a little bit out by the gravel at the first Lesmo. Guess whose gravel it was? Lando Norris's. And I think that made Max smile. But of course, it was never going to be easy to beat the McLarens, as good as they are, and the downforce that they have, the inherent efficient downforce they have in that car, even if they're a little bit slower in a straight line. The McLaren's really quick through the Lesmos, a true litmus test of how good a car is. So Max had to be perfect out of Ascari, through the Parabolica, and certainly through turns 1 and 2 as well, and that run through the Curva Grande. That's where he could get his advantage over the McLarens. Very technical bits of road where it's very easy to make mistakes, as we saw with the McLaren drivers, but Max did none of that. And of course, there was another dimension to this. Because of that inherent efficient downforce advantage that McLaren have, it was pretty clear by half distance that McLaren were going to run the race as long as they could, that first stint as long as they could, probably to come in for softs towards the end. That made it quite a difficult race for Red Bull and Max to strategize, because should they counter by also running to soft tyres at the end of the race, or should they stick to the normal medium hard strategy as suggested by Pirelli? It was difficult to make, and I personally had no idea what they were going to do, whether they were going to go to softs or hards on Max's car, bearing in mind that he hadn't done very much running at all on the hard. It was a difficult call, as I say, but they put him on the hard. Max totally confident, straight out, and unbelievably quick on the hard tyre, knowing he could lean on it. And of course, that's a great thing for Red Bull, to know that if they give Max Verstappen the hard tyre, he's just going to be able to lean on it and be super quick without any issues of the tyre going off. And that's what happened. McLaren, I thought, were better once the medium tyre had gone off, and it went off sooner on the McLaren in the first stint compared with the Red Bull, because of the amount of energy McLaren putting through the tyre, through the Lesmos, and indeed going into Ascari, and probably going into Parabolica as well, just leaning on the tyre a little bit more heat through the tyre. But the interesting thing was that after a while, the balance came back. Even though the grip level had come down slightly, the balance came back. And the balance came back more for the McLarens than it did for the Red Bull. Max at one point was asked, this is in about the middle of the first stint, what are your thoughts on front flap at the pit stop? Should we add, should we subtract? And he said, no, it's pretty good. And then towards the end of the run, he said, no, I think we should go for one extra hole on the front flap. So things were changing for Max in a way that they were not changing for McLaren. Of course, from McLaren's point of view, running very late into the race and leaving their pit stops for the two cars was always going to put them under a different sort of pressure, i.e. two perfect pit stops, very little time to recover if they're not perfect, if they're imperfect. Getting the two cars in and out very efficiently, and of course going to the soft tyre and making sure they maximise the advantage on the soft tyre. Personally, I think they left it too long. Piastri came in lap 47, Lando came in lap 48 for the soft tyres. And if we go back and look at the fuel runs on Friday, when the track was nothing like as grippy as it is now, you can see there Charles Leclerc was on the soft, and he did a 23.5 on lap 8 of the stint. And that would translate, really, extrapolate into maybe lap 10 or lap 11, given the amount of grip there was by Sunday. And he's doing about the same time, 23.5 compared with Oscar 23.4, Lando 23.2, a little bit earlier in the stint, admittedly. So had they come in a little bit earlier, it would have put a little bit more pressure on Max. Easy to say that in hindsight, but certainly it was something we talked about while the race was in real time. The other point, of course, was that it gave Max the freedom to be able to get through the safety car window once he'd put on the hard tyre. He knew that he had to reduce what was about an 18-second gap down to about 9.5 in order to be in a comfortable safety car window. In other words, if towards the end of the race there was a safety car, he would still retain the lead even if the McLarens came in for their tyres at that point. And that gave Max a little bit more room. Leaving their pit stop so late for McLaren gave Max a nice little window with not much traffic in it either, just to chip away. It wasn't even chip, it was chiseling. It was hammering away at the two McLarens, second and a half on a lap sometimes, depending on how many mistakes they made. And sure enough, he had it down to 9.5 seconds within the safety car window now, safe that he would win the race, lead the race, if both McLarens came in at any point from here on in, regardless of the situation. And he had that, and McLaren kind of gave him that window. I suppose from McLaren's point of view, they were thinking, let's see if there is a safety car, we'll stay out for as long as possible. But there wasn't. There were a few incidents. There was an Oliver Burman Carlos Sainz skirmish at the second chicane, but both of them kept going and there was no safety car for that. And that was about it. And McLaren threw the dice there. So the dice for them really was more, we will gamble on there being a safety car, than we'll be really quick at the end of the race on soft tyres and beat Max Verstappen or force him into an error. That was never going to happen. And by the time they both stopped, Max was back in the lead and controlling an 18-second lead, absolutely no problem at all. And on hard tyres, going as quickly as the two McLarens on the soft tyres. Of course, there's another story there, and that is the pit stop drama for Lando Norris, the left front. Felt sorry for the gunner on the left front. It just looked like he needed to touch the gun again just to get the green to allow the McLaren to go. But a very, very fast stop for Oscar Piastri, under 2 seconds. And then something like a 5-second stop for Lando Norris. McLaren did the completely obvious thing, which was then to ask Oscar to give P2 back to Lando Norris. They did that because if they didn't, the situation and the pressure with Lando would begin to mount internally within the team, given what happened at Zandvoort, his retirement at Zandvoort. So that was one very good reason. They also did it because they knew Oscar would say, okay, because from his point of view, it wasn't that big a deal. It wasn't for the win, it was for P2, P3. And from Oscar's point of view, that earned him, again, a lot of points within the team as Mr. Nice Guy who will respond to team orders straight away. But I can tell you this, if that was for the win, if Max Verstappen had not been in the game today and Lando Norris had been leading that Italian Grand Prix from the start, and that pit stop had given the lead to Oscar Piastri, even if McLaren had asked Piastri to give him the win, there's no way in the world Oscar would have done that, in my opinion. He's a racer, and a win is a win. A P2, P3 is not quite the same, particularly if you've got the lead in the championship that he's got. And as I say, this will probably come back to help Oscar as we go forward now, because there might well be situations in reverse where Lando will now have to do it for Oscar. So everybody happy afterwards, except Oscar, I think, was a little bit wistful about the whole thing. He had to be wistful because nobody likes slowing down and giving away position. And it was the right call by McLaren to protect their, as I say, to protect their pressure-filled internal dramas if it had been another issue for Lando. And equally, they had a second and a third on a circuit on which they will fly away from, thinking we didn't have the quickest car today. I'm not sure they're right if they think that. I think that the McLaren was potentially at least as quick. Not potentially, it was at least as quick as the Red Bull, if not slightly quicker. I just think Max did a better job as a racing driver than both Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. No mistakes. Let's exclude what happened in the first corner. Let's not call that a mistake. That was the race. No other mistakes. Whereas Lando ran wide coming out of the Lesmos. Oscar had a bit of a drama with Charles Leclerc early on. When the Lando Max thing happened on the first corner, Oscar backed away just to make sure that he wasn't near either of them. And Charles got a nice run on him coming out of turn 2, got into third place, was weaving quite a lot, but obviously very quick on the straight, no DRS at this point, the Ferrari quite difficult. But then Oscar on that opening lap, round the outside of Charles Leclerc at the first Lesmo. Very impressive to watch. Charles just thought he'd got P3, no problem at all. Turns into the Lesmos to find Oscar Piastri on his outside. Oscar goes past, but then Charles got him again going into turn 1. And for 2 or 3 laps, Oscar was kind of behind Charles and complaining quite a lot on the radio. He's moving this, he's doing that. A bit unlike Oscar, actually. Normally he's fairly quiet and calm in those situations. But once the race settled down a little bit, and the Ferrari's tyres started to go off pretty quickly on the Leclerc car, then Oscar was down the outside into 1 and pulling away. So, yeah, you could say a couple of slight glitches there for Oscar, but not really. You can't really put them as real mistakes, just sort of the opening lap skirmish stuff more than anything else. But nonetheless, if you weigh that alongside Lando's drive, where there were a few little driving errors as well, and he was continually doing that thing where he just diagonals coming out of Ascari. Now, you might say Max was doing the same thing. Everybody was in the race. Of course, in the race, coming out of Ascari, it's a very different story to qualifying when you're on your own. And Charles and both Charles and George were both coming out of Ascari. That's because it's the lowest common denominator. That's because that's what everybody else basically is doing. And in the race, you've got to do that because there's too much debris, too many marbles either side of the racing line coming out of there to take that risk. That's why Max was doing that. On a qualifying lap, you saw him once or twice, he'd stay down by the white. But in the race, he was always coming out, not as far as Lando, coming out to just left of center and then moving across a little bit more as he approached Parabolica. That was the groove, and he did that absolutely millimeter perfect every lap of the race. Great to watch. But in the race also, of course, if you're in traffic and you're following the car in front, you do what that car in front is doing out of Ascari. So there was no discussion there. The other thing I'd say about Lando's race is that after that opening lap, or during the opening lap going into Ascari, I think it was, he got on the radio to say Max not only ran wide and used the track to hold position, used the runoff area to hold position, but also forced me off onto the grass. Now, I think that was fairly disingenuous of Lando. It was worth trying it, of course, but everybody knows, especially the drivers, that the track narrows going into turn 1, and that if you are going to be on the outside, it wasn't as if Max had the right-hand side of the Red Bull on the white line. There was room there, but you know it narrows, and Max had his car in the position for Lando to back off slightly and go in behind him into 1. That's, I guess, obviously what he thought he was going to do. But Lando stayed on it on the grass, lifted the throttle on the grass, and the track's now narrowing. And he's now alongside Max going into the braking area into 1. And from Max's perspective, he's braking much, much later than Max. And he can feel that the McLaren's going to run wide. Max admittedly always brakes quite early into 1. But nonetheless, he can feel in his peripheral vision that Lando's going to run wide. And that's why he does what he does. And that's why he was so annoyed, as I say, after the race. Didn't show it in terms of his facial expression, didn't show it in terms of, didn't give it away in terms of anything he said. He was Mr. Polite, Mr. I've just won the Italian Grand Prix. But look into his eyes, and you can see there how annoyed he was about that. So a great win. That was a case study on how to win a Grand Prix in maybe not the best car. Just a brilliant drive by Max Verstappen, I thought. A great Grand Prix from start to finish. I guess you might say not a lot of overtakes, but so what? Because DRS isn't that effective. We had some great defences and we had some great moves, and it was just a very, very good Grand Prix from beginning to end, I thought. And I think the Red Bull much improved with that revised, upgraded floor they have. And it'll be interesting to see how they now go in Baku and Singapore. Slower circuits for the most part, long straight obviously in Baku. But it'll be interesting to see how they go now, because the Red Bull looks to be a pretty good car in terms of balance, in terms of grip level. All the stuff that Max used to complain about, no front end and bouncing a little bit here and the back ends all over the place. None of that came up this weekend. And I suspect that a lot of that is due to the floor. And of course, the other thing about Max, what a drive. Because as he came up to take the checkered flag, guess who was in front of him just about to be lapped? His teammate Yuki Tsunoda. And if that doesn't tell you everything about how good Max's drive was, then I don't know what does. Absolutely superb. And McLaren, I think, will come away thinking, well, we didn't quite have the performance here. We'll get to a slower circuit again. We'll see how we go there. Should be all right. But realistically, I think it was the drivers that got beaten today by Max Verstappen rather than the McLaren car as such. I think the McLaren car was a very good one. The Ferrari, which finished fourth in the hands of Charles Leclerc and sixth in the hands of Lewis Hamilton, was, to put it bluntly, disappointing. Obviously, the tyres went off very, very quickly. And like everybody else, they kept some sort of balance once the tyres had gone off, and it wasn't that bad. And indeed, for all of the race, Charles Leclerc managed to hold off George Russell, which was a real feat, bearing in mind George started on his beloved mediums like everybody else, and then went to the hard. He was always going to be competitive on the hard and the medium, George. And yet Charles beat him. Very, very good drive by Charles Leclerc in that respect. No mistakes at all, but a difficult day for Ferrari. They didn't take any step forward on a circuit which should have rewarded a lot of their positive points, top speed being a very good example, whereas Red Bull did. So Charles Leclerc P4, George Russell P5, good drive, but he'll be annoyed. Top speed didn't allow him to get past the Ferrari, even in DRS, but he beat Lewis Hamilton, who was P6. Lewis, for the most part, was doing about the same lap times as Charles, so he'll come away from Monza feeling reasonably confident that he's kind of there or thereabouts and where he needs to be within the Ferrari team. So it's a positive day for Lewis Hamilton in the Ferrari. Alex Albon, again in the points, drove very well in the Williams-Mercedes, had a few dramas, as he often does, but managed to still finish 7th. And Gabriel Bortoletto just got 8th on the last lap from Kimi Antonelli. What a battle between these two, bearing in mind one of them's in a factory Mercedes and the other is in a Sauber-Ferrari. An Audi, you could say, I suppose. Amazing that Bortoletto won that battle. Very, very good drive by Bortoletto. Not amazing, just impressive that he did. Kimi Antonelli was 9th. And Isack Hadjar, from nowhere, managed to score a point yet again, finished 10th in the Racing Bulls Honda, a car that wasn't very good around Monza, but again, Isack Hadjar got the absolute maximum from it and drove extremely well. Carlos Sainz had his incidents, as ever, as he always would, finished 11th. Oliver Behrman, I thought, drove very well to finish 12th. He was behind Gabriel Bortoletto for a lot of the race. He came in quite early, quite a short first stint to get out of traffic. It didn't really work. He was behind Bortoletto for much of the middle phase of the race, going about a 10th of a second a lap slower than Bortoletto, which I thought was very, very good, very impressive. And he finished 12th ahead of Yuki Tsunoda in the works Red Bull Honda, so he can be very pleased about that. Before we go, a very quick word about the special edition, limited edition REC watch to commemorate Ayrton Senna's 1986 Lotus 98T chassis number 4. The tachymeter of this, as I say, limited edition watch includes the alley from the plenum tubes built by Team Lotus for that engine. Obviously, there was a major plenum chamber, but the tubes made of alley made by Team Lotus. And that alley has now been reformed into this watch, limited edition. They're going quickly. Details in the description below this video. Ayrton raced, of course, this car in the Italian Grand Prix at Monza in '86. Wasn't a great day for him. Gearbox went on the line, hadn't qualified that well either. But in the second half of the year, when Ayrton drove that car, he had 2 seconds in Germany and Hungary and finished the year with a very good 3rd in Mexico before, unfortunately, a retirement in Australia, but some great results. And it was the last Grand Prix Lotus to be liveried in black and gold as well. So this watch commemorates that as well. And a big thanks to Jetcraft, to Track Ninja, to OEM Exclusive, and of course to REC Watchers for their support of this channel, and to you too for your support. Thanks for watching. I'll be back doing some live streams this week. See you then. Thank you.